Good afternoon. My name is Andrew McFarlane. I'm the moderator for this panel on open banking. So delighted to see the participants today. I'm joined by a very illustrious panel. Just very briefly, I'm the Executive Director, Modernization and Strategy for Payments Canada. And in my former life, I was the Global Open Banking Lead for Accenture. So let me introduce my illustrious panel, and I'm going to go to Cash first for a brief intro.
Hi, everybody. Kashmera self. You guys caught that. Everybody calls me Cash. I'm with Interac, AVP Strategy and Emerging Solutions Delivery, and I lead a portion of the open banking portfolio for Interac. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Cash. Senator Deacon.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for including me. I'm an independent senator from Nova Scotia and former entrepreneur prior to coming to the Senate, and very concerned about all things innovative.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Rami.
Hi, I'm Rami Thabet. I'm Vice President of Digital Product at RBC and absolutely excited to be with this panel again.
Thanks, Rami. And Ben, over to you.
Ben Harrison, partner at Portage and head of partnerships and policy. And as well, excited to be in what should be a very interesting discussion today.
Great stuff. Thanks, Ben. So let's get stuck into it. First question this morning or this afternoon is really, there's a continued talk about the delay in open banking in Canada. And assuming that the regulation does get introduced at some stage, what problem do we feel that Canada is trying to solve by introducing open banking? So Ben, if you can just address what problem do you think that Canada is trying to solve by the introduction of open banking?
Sure, happy to kick things off. I think if open banking in Canada had a tagline, it might actually be the solution to a problem that we can't actually all agree on. And I think, this is at fundamentally the core of why we have progressed so little in the last 3 years. I've said this before, it feels like Canada might be the only country that is pursuing this without a clear vision, a shared vision of why we are doing it. And it's really frustrating because there are so many good reasons why and so many problems to solve. And I'll just list a couple and then I'll get into one specifically. This would solve some of the problems around competition and innovation in the financial services sector in this country. It would address some of the inequities and inequalities for individuals in the financial services sector in this country. It would obviously address the existing data security risks that we're all very aware of. This would bring a growing and fast maturing fintech sector under a regulatory regime that would allow them to compete on a more level playing field with incumbent financial institutions. And it would help in turn innovate foster and grow that group. The other thing, and one that's becoming increasingly relevant, is that we just need to stay on par with the rest of the world, both developing and developed and developing countries who are well on their way and well down their own open banking journeys. But and while I'm hopeful that we'll be answering these questions in short order, if I get off the soapbox and speak directly to the question, I think the fundamental problem that open banking and more broadly open data frameworks helps to solve for is one of engagement. There's a quote in the Competition and Market Authority's report that came out many years ago, which was the sort of impetus and catalyst for implementing open banking in the UK, and I'll paraphrase, but essentially it was saying weak customer response plays such a central role in the challenges and issues around the retail banking sector that any measures to inform, empower, and engage individuals and businesses need to be central to addressing those problems. And I think there are few policy solutions that would address those three pain points, like open banking. If it were easier to access products and services, if it was easier to act on the insights provided, if it took a lot of the challenge away from individuals who don't have the time or don't have the know-how to make some of these really important financial decisions, that would do wonders for the not just financial wellness of Canadians, but the physical and mental wellness of Canadians as well. We've all seen those studies that talk about the average Canadian being $200 away from insolvency every month. These sorts of infrastructure and framework components that we need, that open banking would deliver, I think, help address those. And this is a Payments Canada Summit, so engagement is is the problem I think we solve. I'd be remiss, we're at a Payments Canada Summit, if I didn't mention that the critical component to this is payment initiation. it's great to see the insights. That's absolutely critical, but the ability to act on those insights is the most important thing. So any framework that doesn't have payment initiation in the roadmap and clearly articulated as part of the strategy, I think is really missing the boat. And most importantly, the infrastructure, the RTR and access for all fintechs and other third parties to be able to play in that sandbox and help drive this change. That is absolutely critical. I think that's the problem that PayCan can help solve for us here.
Perfect.
So I'll stop.
I think, Ben, that was a cracking first answer. Senator Deacon, how would you top that, or what would you agree with there?
I'd just say what Ben said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, I can go back 2 years less 2 weeks to the Senate report, and this is what the Senate of Canada decided was why open banking was needed. Canadian consumers need open banking regulations as soon as possible for three main reasons: to keep their personal financial information safe, to be provided with more choice and improved financial products and services, and to help keep the Canadian financial sector strong and internationally competitive. That's what we thought 2 years ago, and that was from a reluctant bunch to begin with, as we started down the path of studying open banking, and became an enthusiastic band of supporters by the time we finished, over about 14 weeks of study. So it's, for me, it is all about what Ben said. We have right now, our financial system is regressive for marginalized people. The costs go up in relative terms for those who have the least ability to pay. And so then I look at small business. I just say, there's not a single small business person went into starting a small business for the administrative burden of running that small business. It's the weight you've got to carry as you pursue what you really are inspired and passionate about. So there's so much we can bring to bear, and I'll hand it off because I think it's been well stated by Ben.
Perfect. Sounds good. Cash, from your side, what's the problem that Canada's trying to solve with the introduction of open banking?
Yeah, kind of sums it up, right? So we already saw that there was a decrease in cash usage. We already saw that businesses were trying to figure out how to adopt new forms of payment. This is even pre-pandemic. And then all of a sudden that actually happened a whole heck of a lot faster as a result of the pandemic. And then with that adoption of digital solutions, more risk. And so that's what we're trying to solve. I mean, in a very narrow view, a very narrow scope. It's open banking will help actually be able to allow Canadians to be able to, consume and use the services that they want, to make sure that their financial health is all good and solid. Yeah, that's pretty narrow. And we got to get down to at least doing that at a minimum. But I think the bigger opportunity here is how this lends itself to other areas of opportunity for our ecosystem more broadly, and the digital ecosystem. It's how does actually open banking become open finance, and how does open finance become open data, and actually how do we actually facilitate the needs of Canadians, because they don't know or care whether it's financial services or payments or where things start and stop. That's last thing that any of them care about. And so how do we actually make sure that the right measures are put in place so that they can get their needs met? It sounds so trite, but actually it's basic.
Yeah. I think you're spot on. And I think we'll unpack a little bit of that at the end around open finance and open data and the like. Thank you for that. Rami, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up a thread that Ben started. I think we agree on some parts, but disagree wildly on a couple of others. But wouldn't be a life of the panel if we didn't, Ben, right? I think that we have to get crisp in Canada about the problem we are solving, and what has been the predominant challenge to date in a conversation. We begin having a conversation about the free-flowing exchange of data in a safe and secure manner, where the client is at the center, and quickly evolve into all things banking, all things payments. I'm just waiting for a session on open banking where we think it will ail climate change and could be the next best thing to the COVID vaccine. And I think that does a disservice to Canada. Absolutely, Colin, there is a competitiveness reason to do this. Absolutely, Ben, there is a question around use cases that absolutely will benefit Canadians. But let's discuss those as opposed to sort of an overarching sort of nebulous approach to policy that says open banking will be the answer. The answer to what question is going to be the primary piece. I think on and on, Andrew, study after study. Our system is quite quite exalted in terms of an international scale, in terms of NPS and LTR. Canadians do have unparalleled access to services that did not exist in those geographies that they stepped into open banking, such as Scandinavia and the peer-to-peer payments use case that Interac enables. So our point of departure is quite different as a geography. Let's contemplate that, understand that, craft the right problem domain that we're looking to solve, and step into it thoughtfully.
Perfect. Thank you, Rami. Geez, we've got some good divergent views there. So can we unpack one particular topic? And we talked about diversity and inclusion specifically. And I know there's been recent studies where we talked about low trust of banks by Black entrepreneurs and how there's a clear need for more fintech lending mechanisms. I mean, Senator Deacon, you've been actively involved in this topic, very interested in this topic. Do you see open banking specifically changing this landscape? And to Rami's point, it's not the solving and solution for everything. Specifically, can you see open banking certainly aiding with diversity and inclusion? And do you think that's going to be a key driver for innovation for the Canadian open banking ecosystem? So, Senator Deacon, your thoughts?
Yes, in short. The study that you're talking about is one that we released last week. We found that there is low trust in banks in general among Black entrepreneurs, and low trust in fintechs among Black entrepreneurs. One, I think, is because they just don't know what fintechs are for the most part. Any conversation I have with an average Canadian, fintech is not a term that they're familiar with. But it was just interesting to see there was low trust in both. I think the reasons are different. But the reality is that there has been demonstrated evidence that south of the border that fintech lenders are far more effective in reaching racialized businesses and those who are marginalized with effective, cost-efficient services than the traditional banking system in the United States. We don't have those comparative data in Canada. One was New York Stern School of Business looking at the PPP program distribution and found that that fintech lenders lent up to 7 times as much, issued as much as 7 times as much PPP loans to small businesses in the U.S. In their COVID relief program as banks did. Then there's the Philadelphia Fed looking at the divergence between traditional credit scores, FICO scores, and the lending that fintech lender was doing during an 8-year period of a study, and found it went from 80% correlation to begin with down to below 35% correlation after 8 years, because they're identifying alternative data sources and data points and looking at those data points differently and finding, according to the Philadelphia Fed, invisible prime borrowers from within what was deemed to be the uncreditworthy population. And I think that starts to get at the fact that we've got a system that very much is based on risk being assessed according to wealth and income. But there are very creditworthy individuals that don't have a lot of wealth and don't have a lot of income. And so for me, it's, and then the study that we looked at, or we put out last week, showed that most Black entrepreneurs start their businesses from personal savings. And given that the Black population in Canada is earning so much less on average than the white population, they're starting behind the 8 ball to begin with, and there's not a lot of family wealth. So you're seeing very low levels of personal savings. And then credit cards. Credit cards are not the way to start a small business. And it's just putting yourself behind the 8 ball to begin with. So I think there's some real opportunity here from our standpoint, and it specifically deals with diversity and inclusion.
Okay, thank you, Rami. You're obviously you will have probably a different view on that one. Do you want to give me your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. Colin and I are going to disagree immensely on this particular one. I think linking the two together is an incredible leap in causality. You're absolutely right, Senator Deacon. I think there's a wider thread. If we do that study, we will see the same response, deeper, lack of trust in schooling, in higher education, in policing. These are societal challenges that span the expanse of Canadiana. And I think also linking US data points on very hyper racialized communities in the US is drawing another parallel. You do have a solid point in the sense of we have to talk about engagement. We do have to talk about the provisioning of sound financial advice to communities that are stepping into conversations about opening up a business, financial wealth and health, and the health of a particular individual's financial state. And these are solid things to absolutely talk about. So let's talk about systems of policy, systems of engagement with communities about how to seek alternative forms of advice, and advice that is garnered by the domestic institutions that do exist in Canada. But I think in linking those two together is a bit of a bridge too far for me in terms of causality. But you're absolutely right. Engagement is core. And I think I link that back to your point, Ben. It's really about engagement. It's really about the provisioning of advice. Could there be better advice provided to these types of communities? Absolutely. And I think that's something all of us need to strive to do better. And some programs have begun already that have been inclusive of Canada's largest banks and the DSIBs and all of the institutions at play here.
Yep, for sure.
I'll just add a little quick point to Rami's bit, and the point is very well taken, that where there is a relationship between a Black entrepreneur and a bank, their trust in banks is more than doubled. So relationship and representation, absolutely critical. And we don't have representation at senior levels in the banks relative to the population. So there's very much truth in all of that.
So back to that theme of engagement as well. Back to Cash, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Rami's point is an interesting one. It's like, you got to put policies in place and you got to put all these measures in place in order for you to address like these communities and make sure that, once the foundational stuff is in place, then actually you can be able to enact and put the stuff that they need in place. The thing that bothers me a little bit about that is like, you can't just say, well, it's an issue across the board in education and healthcare, in this and that. We're here in terms of representatives of the financial services ecosystem. And I think the thing that we should think about is like, how do we actually use our positions to actually influence within that arena? If we start to, it's no different than what I said in the first question, Andrew, where it's like, where do we start and stop? Well, it's like, we have line of sight that we need to tackle all these other things. But if we start to like boil the ocean and I'm trying to think about how we're going to address it across the board, nothing is going to happen. And so, I have a particular lens. Like, even when I look at like female entrepreneurs, I'm like, they don't have a lot of mechanisms in place. And so it's like, do we then not help support them? They are seriously impacted right now by this she session. And I'm like, so do we then just turn a blind eye, especially when, so partially there are some government mechanisms that are being put in place with like the latest budget. So it's like, we can't just dismiss it or discount it because it's too big, or think about it just like, oh, well, there's all these other arenas where they're equally as challenged.
No, completely agree.
Does that make sense?
It does make perfect sense. Ben, your thoughts from a fintech lending point of view?
Yeah, I mean, so I think one thing you can't debate is Canada as a whole is really bad at lending to small businesses. So CD Howe report that came out, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, that talked about the delta between what banks lend to big companies versus small companies is actually the widest gap amongst the OECD countries. We've proven we're not very good at lending to small businesses, and now is the time more than ever to be good at lending to small business. And I think we can debate the use cases of open banking until we're all blue in the face. But one cohort that is clearly benefiting from open banking, and the senator's example of cash flow lending is a great one, is small business. So that I think, if for no other reason we wanted to do this, like that is a great reason to get started and do it in a meaningful way. The other, to Rami's point about climate change, you should look at an organization called Icebreaker. So the gentleman who started and led the working group around open banking in the UK, Gavin Starks, after helping put the infrastructure in place for open banking, started an organization called Icebreaker. And the idea is to use data from all the different companies around the world to start to address some of these issues. And I think this is fundamentally the challenge we have right now. Is we're so myopic in our thinking about what this open banking thing is. We're missing the boat on this big digital economy that's taking shape around us and fundamentally changing how we need to be running our economies. This is why we need to be a bit more ambitious in our thinking about what we're doing here with open banking. Open banking is one step in a bigger shift that we have to go through. And maybe to the last point, I fundamentally do not believe engagement across, from a consumer standpoint, is fundamentally different between countries, like a UK or Canada. And so I think these issues of addressing engagement are transcendent. They're not UK specific. They're not Australia specific. I think they're generally consistent across the board.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben.
Can I just add one more thing,
Cash.
Andrew? There's also, if you don't solve this in a meaningful way, specifically around lending, you're going to then actually create a whole other situation around predatory lending. And do we really want to further exacerbate this problem where it's like you're going through these other options because there isn't anything else available to you?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Rami, I'll give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, none. I mean, I completely agree with Ben. Absolutely. I'm familiar with their work. And I think you hit a point there that I do want to draw out, though, that you're talking really about creating a system that is focused on a policy discussion regarding innovation and regarding creating a environment that is conducive for small businesses and really propelling an economic output forward. And I think that's the dialogue we're starting to miss. You're absolutely right, Ben, in the myopia that I think we've gotten into over the last, let's say, 2.5 years, that it's become about which data element goes to which party across which pipe, has done the whole discussion a disservice versus at which end are we holding this this balancing act from. I think there are a number of use cases that can be absolutely value accretive, and I think we'd all agree. And Senator Deacon, you've been around businesses your entire life. When I started my own small business, I did not definitely set up in Canada. I went down to the United States, and that is not just about data sharing and open banking. It's about an entire ecosystem that gets going. And you're absolutely right, Cash. We do have to start somewhere, but as we start, we need to be clear on the policy objective. We need to be clear on what we're solving for. Otherwise, we try to solve everything, and that's going to be the challenge as we step into this dialogue.
Yep. Can we talk about, there was a point made in the intro around international competitiveness, and I think, Ben, you talked about how far behind we are around the rest of the world. Rami, just a question to you. Do you think that Canada is really disadvantaged as a result of the lack of open banking at this point in time?
I think I'll say what everybody else is expecting me to, which is no, I don't actually believe that it's the case. That does not mean that we do not have certain use cases that we are behind other global geographies on, or that there is a bigger aspiration that we should be aspiring to. I think the question is, again, back to by what measure are we talking about competitiveness? Are we talking about the stability of the financial system? Are we talking about the availability of consumer use cases? Are we talking about, dollars of lending or fluidity of full economy? Considering this is a payment summit, we should probably talk about how there are steps underway through payments modernization to really bring up things like limits and other conversations where we do trail international geographies. But in many measures, we are the envy of other geographies, and having had lots of conversations with counterparts in the rest of the world, there are things we need to be incredibly proud of. It still goes back to, I think, where we started. By what measure and what are we trying to drive forward? I would believe this geography has a lot of work to do in the small business arena, but that is not just a banking centric challenge that we have to step into. That is really around the confines of the entire system. But other use cases, I think we have quite a lot to herald. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure this one will be a lively one across the group.
I'm sure it will. Ben, I think you introduced that international competitiveness in your intro. Your thoughts on our lack of competitiveness or otherwise, given we don't have open banking in Canada?
Sure. I mean, I'm not surprised that other banks would see or envy the Canadian system because of the role that banks still have the prominence and influence and ability to direct policy and all of that. Like any bank would look at that and say, yes, I want that. I think I was on a panel a couple of years ago with Scott Morrison, who I think most would know, led the open banking review in Australia, and now has led and delivered his recommendation on payments, which TLDR is they're going to do payment initiation because that's how you bring all of this together. But he said, the true measure of success with open banking, as he views it, is not that a fintech takes a customer away from a bank. It's that a bank takes a customer away, an incumbent takes a customer away from a fintech. What he was implying is that introducing an open banking framework and more broadly an open data sharing network is that it forces all of the players to be better. It forces them to think differently about how they run their business today, the technology infrastructure that they're using, and fundamentally put the customer at the center of what they're doing and why they exist. From the fintech standpoint, I would actually, and this is maybe a nuanced argument, I would sort of say I don't know that global competitiveness is on the top of mind of most fintechs. What's top of mind is domestic competitiveness and having the infrastructure in place to compete and to be able to compete on sort of fair and equal terms. And we do not have that today in Canada. The lack of an open banking framework is one component. The lack of access to infrastructure, payments infrastructure in particular, is another. This is the Payment Canada Summit. RTR was supposed to be introduced in 2019. We're in 2021. We still don't have it, and we still have question marks about how fintechs and other paytechs will be able to access that infrastructure once it's up and running. So my view is we need to focus on the domestic market. We need to get all the different components right to then enable this emerging and again fast growing sector to compete on equal terms with the players in the market and let the best player win. That is actually my view, maybe counterintuitive, but my view on the global competitiveness topic.
Yeah, for sure. Senator Deacon, your thoughts?
Well, we'll let Rami come in as a cleanup hitter here at the end, at the bases loaded, and see what he can where he can hit that. I look at it very simply that our financial system is the foundation of our economy. It's upon which everything else is built. And if our financial system is not one of the world's most competitive, then it slows down everything. And that's probably why you've seen one of the biggest proponents of open banking in this country has been our competition commissioner, Matthew Boswell. He speaks constantly, regularly, forcefully on this issue. And for me, there's a simple reason. Competition breeds innovation, breeds productivity growth, breeds prosperity. It's a linear equation. And I look at fees being able to be increased without delivering a corresponding increase in value to customers because of the competitive advantage that you have in terms of not allowing new entrants to come into the same degree, I don't think is good for any economy in any sector, but not in the foundation of our economy as well. So I look at it and say we have to prioritize this. And as regulation comes into place, I think Canada does have the ability to catch up. But our worry, to go back to what Ben said, our worry should not be necessarily just catching up to the rest of the world. Our worry should be about Canada becoming as good as we can get. Because when Canada is focused on being as good as we can get, we do really, really well. And we are globally competitive. But I rarely like chasing the other guy as being the standard. We can set a standard, and I believe we have an ability to. We've got all the elements there, but there isn't and hasn't been the desire. And that's what I'm hoping we can change.
Okay, perfect. And Cash, your thoughts?
The Senator Deacon touched on how the financial services ecosystem is being foundational to a lot of everything else running our economy, right? And a key thing here is if we don't actually, I feel it firsthand. I don't know, Rami, Ben, if you're trying to hire people right now, you guys must be feeling the pain of that. And one of the things is like, we're not doing anything to actually move the needle forward in financial services. So a lot of the workforce is moving into other industries where things are moving much more rapidly. And from that perspective, it's like, then we're going to try and play catch up and like get the good staff that actually want to do the amazing work to make sure we're building the innovative products to fulfill the needs of Canadians. Like, we are having a huge issue on that one. And so that foundational piece, Senator Deacon, that you were referring to, it has ramifications in all other areas of our economy that if we don't start to tackle now, we're going to be feeling the pain for this for a very long time to come.
Completely agree. What do we do to catch up? How can we, so Senator Deacon, you referenced before, you think we can certainly move quickly once we get structured and ready. What can we do to catch up?
Just prioritize it. Start doing something. I mean, yes, it's great. The RPOF legislation came in, renamed into the Budget Implementation Act. That was a step quite a few years too late, but it's a step. But we just got to start moving. I think the sports betting legislation that's just arrived in the Senate is important for a whole lot of reasons, but the fact that it took priority over our new privatization or privacy and digital economy legislation getting through the House of Commons is, for me, really depressing. So we've got to start to prioritize these issues that are foundational to our ability to grow a digital tax base, a digital economy into the future, and we're not. And so for me, let's just start doing it. Let's not try and get it right. I think in Ottawa, there's often a real problem with perfection being the enemy of any progress whatsoever. Australia's on its third iteration of its data rights implementation. I mean, they're moving with haste. And it doesn't mean they're being dangerous. It doesn't mean they're being reckless. It just means they're moving with haste and adjusting as they need to. That's what startups do. That's what we've got to get into our economy. So let's get going.
Yeah.
Let's stop talking at meetings like this. We don't want to do this anymore.
We just want to get going. Open question to any of the other panelists, if anyone wants to jump in on that.
I'll jump in. Might as well. Colin edged me there. So absolutely, Colin. I think one of the things we'll all universally agree to is reduction of the rhetoric. I think you've heard me say it at the end of the consultation in December with the advisory committee. Can we get past the rhetoric? Ben, I'm sure you and I can get in a room and we can always have these conversations and find a path forward where we may, agree on 90% of the path or 80% of the path. But I think trying to figure out how to piecemeal a very complex financial system that cuts across FedProv and trying to do it from the center and not considering all the intermediate parts, considering the Canadian financial institutions play a significant role today, will be doing the topic a disjustice. I don't think anybody's going to end up arguing about the merits or about the fact that we do have to step into this direction. I think the question is going to be the how and what pace. And, Senator Deacon, Australia is incredibly different, both in terms of its makeup and federalism, as opposed to the FedProv situation that we do have to contend with, and secondarily, temperament. I think I've reported to enough Australians in my life to know that they cut once and they cut 3 times and measure once, and Canadians measure 10 times, and then we'll talk about cutting. And then we'll talk about cutting 3 times. So I think you're both right in the sense of we do have to move forward. Let's lower down the rhetoric and let's, I think, figure out how the private sector steps into this and begins to have open conversations about how to bring certain use cases out to market.
Perfect. Cash, Ben, anything to add?
I generally try and avoid commenting on how to win a race when we haven't started said race. So I'll leave it. I'll leave to what it's been said already.
I think that's all you need to say, Ben. I think that's perfect. Let's talk about the future. So we've got 10 minutes, 10 minutes left to talk about the future. Cash, when we look at the future of open banking, I know in the chat I'm seeing, is it open banking now, consumer-directed finance? What is it? So we should have maybe called it consumer-directed finance in Canada, but open banking sounded pretty good. Interested in, Cash, your thoughts around the future. So you mentioned open finance, you mentioned open data. Is digital ID the glue that brings it all together? What do we need to be successful to pivot from consumer-directed finance once it gets up and running? To Senator Deacon's point, what's next? Where does it go?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't stop at financial services. And so, you asking me about the future, and I would like to say I'm a practitioner of strategic foresight. And so we monitor a lot of things that is happening in the market. We figure out what the trends and the signals are. We're trying to figure out how all of that factors into what a potential future state is. But if you're asking me to make a prediction, I think that's typically made on seriously shaky ground. What we do is we actually try to unpack what various plausible scenarios are that could unfold in the market and what that future state may look like. And you go through kind of a full spectrum. You go really dark and dystopian on one side and extremely utopian on the other side, and a whole bunch of stuff in between. But I'm going to start with the dark side. The dark side is, we do nothing. We sit, we wait, we watch, we talk a bit more about this stuff. And while all that stuff is happening, the dynamics in the market continues to unfold around us. And it's driven by four things. It's driven by the customer. We all want things at our fingertips. We give it to me now kind of mannerism that we all want that today. That instant gratification is what resonates with all of us above everything else. And then there's technology like cloud, technology like open APIs. All of this helps actually efficiently meet those needs to get me what I want right away. AI, ML in terms of predictive behaviors, all that stuff is moving forward, regardless of whether we do anything with open banking or not. And then in terms of the competitive landscape and big tech, if you were to go back to when the iPhone first came out, none of us would have thought, oh, there's going to be something that they're going to do, then payments, and oh, shoot, should we be worried about what Apple and Google and stuff are going to do in the financial services sector? That was 2007, 2008. We probably didn't think that it was going to be chomping at us the way it is right now. They're all here. They're all right now providing financial services that we should be providing for Canadians, not those guys. And then the regulators, they're the ones that are desperately trying to keep up. And in reality, they're just responding or they're reacting to what's happening around them. And so, yeah, that's the one side of the spectrum, that kind of dark view. I know it sounds awful. So yeah, we could sit around and just talk about it and figure out if we can get the will to actually do something about it. But let me bring you back. Okay. So I said there was a whole spectrum. Go to the good side now. The good side. The good side, and I know it sounds so trite, but putting the customer at the center of that Canadian digital ecosystem. We are agnostic. Ben, you talked about, ESGs and the green footprint that we're all trying to actually make sure that we're all, a part of, and no carbon footprint. Those are all across a whole multitude of industries, and we need to actually figure out how to facilitate that across the Canadians. This is not just in the context of financial services. It is not just in the context of our financial health and well-being. It's more broadly around our lives generally, where we live, where we work, where we play, how we do all this stuff. It's around telcos. They're a big piece of this. It's around other utilities. How do we actually get access to that information so that we can facilitate the needs of Canadians? There's a huge infrastructure play here, manufacturing, mobility and transit, recreation. All those things need to come together to a connected community to figure out how we can have, a cause and effect, and a positive one for our economy, our workforce, our natural resources, which we are rich in. So why don't we tap into all those things and figure out how we can move this stuff forward? And those will actually be all the factors that contribute to us moving to higher up on that. I think it was Senator Deacon, you said it, on that innovation index. And if you want to be notably higher on that innovation index, it's a direct correlation to economic prosperity for us here in Canada. So yeah, we could talk about data aggregation and payment initiation and that digital ID thing. Let's go, let's do that stuff. But if we really want to have those, real meaningful outcomes, if we want to really have those unintended consequences, we talked about EDI from that perspective, it's actually going to take all of our collective preparedness and quite frankly, our will to try and figure out how to make this happen. But we got to keep line of sight into like, what's that long-term vision? And then how do we execute on that in the short to medium term?
Awesome answer, Cash. Awesome. Senator Deacon, you were referenced there. Do you want to also give your thoughts on Cash's comments, but also your commentary around where does this evolve to?
I just want to say what she said. But you won't let me get away with that. Just to keep things focused on Rami and RBC, just because that's fun. There was a great article in the Globe and Mail 2 years ago where Neil McLaughlin and Dave McKay were both quoted talking about the pace of change in China, and the fact that they were starting 3 or 4 years ahead at that time, and were innovating at a time that was at a pace that was 5 times faster than RBC. And I think that's what we've got to worry about in Canada, is that we've got so much opportunity to deliver increased value in all sorts of industries, as Cash said. But in terms of the cost of moving money, the financial friction associated with borrowing money, moving money, investing money, we have got to lessen it, because in COVID times, our debt is so much higher in our public sector, which means that it's going to come. The interest rates at some point will go back up again. It's going to be something that's going to cause us to have a burden that we have to carry. We've got to have a faster growing economy. We just have to. I would love to see us take a different approach to regulation overall and how we regulate in Canada. Turkey's better than us. No. Turkey is one country in the OECD that beat us in terms of having a worse regulatory burden than Canada's. So we're at the bottom of the list in terms of regulatory burden. Everybody wants regulation, but you need regulation that keeps up with business models and technology. And so we've got to start building regulation from standards in, rather than a black box in Ottawa out. We have to be able to be nimble, to keep up with opportunity, and to keep making sure that innovations can occur in Canada, that then we get the chance to export them around the world. We've got to make sure that Canadians get greater and greater value for money at the foundation of so many elements of our society that relate to digital economy. So that requires a different approach to regulation. And it does not require a deregulation overall. That's the big thing. We just need to be smarter about it, and smarter about how we evolve our regulation over time, so we can be more agile and responsive.
Perfect. Rami, I'm sure you've got some views, but also a response to Senator Deacon there.
Yeah, no, for once, I think I'm going to throw it back at Senator Deacon, what he said. So you asked for that, Senator Deacon. At the end of the day, you're absolutely right. We do need a regulatory environment that is, I think, conducive to business models that are emerging and to a shaped economy. And that applies for both fintechs, non-fintechs, and the current FI system, who is the bearer of the regulatory burden today, and that is okay, because that is the role that the domestic financial institutions do carry. But as we bring new entrants into the market, we're going to have to thoughtfully evaluate that and look at that distribution in a robust way. I think Andrew asked the question really about what does acceleration look like. To Ben's point, it is hard watching a race not start, that everybody's looking and the pistol's up in the air and everybody's waiting to hear it. And I think at this point, I think all of us are ready to just clap our hand in unison and make it sound like the gun went off. And let's pick a couple of use cases in market that can begin to iterate the market forward. I think this constant waiting for something to proverbially drop from Ottawa is not doing anybody justice. I do believe the market has the wherewithal and the talent and, frankly, the long historical ability to have conversations in a market-driven way to advance the file forward. And if anything else, I'd be calling for market participants to just begin that conversation.
Yep, sounds good. Ben, your final thoughts, and then we've got a couple of questions from the audience.
Sure. I mean, I think the model within which we've built our financial services infrastructure in this country did not account years ago for the introduction of some of these new players. And so I think some of the models that we've used to build the highways that we use to move money and data, and how we're going to build the future, just they're not one and the same. And as we've consistently said across this whole discussion, this is a bigger topic than open banking. And so really what we need is leadership at the highest levels to more articulately outline what a digital economy in Canada will look like. Like if you look at the stuff that's going on in Australia, and we can debate, the good or bad, but they're not talking just about open banking. They're talking about the CDR, like the consumer data right, and this idea that the individual is in control of their data. And that they have agency over where that goes and how it's used and who gets access to it. And they're talking now about like exporting that model globally. Like this is on such another level that it makes us kind of look foolish to be talking about these narrow issues. I think having that focus helps us then answer all sorts of questions about where we go with open banking and telco and like all of that. But we can't have that, the market cannot drive that conversation. The market as we know it today cannot drive that conversation. It has to come at a higher level. And then the market can implement those, and the market can iterate on those, and the market can grow. Like that's how this has to play out. I'll maybe just make one quick comment, because this I think is something that is an implication of us continuing down sort of just this, like let the market figure it out and we'll be fine. Which is, if you're in a fast growing fintech, you need to have some, in financial services, you need to have some guardrails around how you're going to build your business out over the next 12 to 24 months. And this lack of any direction on what open banking will look like, where we'll end up with PayMod, is creating real challenge in fueling these companies to continue to grow at the pace they're growing at. And I think even a bigger issue is it's creating a whole bunch of uncertainty for new fintechs to start. And we need to begin to answer those questions. We have to have clarity on that. Otherwise, we're going to be in a much worse state than some might consider us to be today.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ben. Question, and it's probably, Ben, for you, and I think you've addressed a little bit of it within that question. Questions posed: how would we build the appropriate open banking infrastructure, processes, and policies without having the Canadian banks influencing too much? And over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to take as a country an approach similar to, I've said this for years now, to Australia. This isn't about open banking. This is about a consumer data right. This is about giving people control over what is increasingly becoming a very important and valuable asset. And then you build out from there. That I think is how you get at not having a certain constituency or cohort influence the conversation too much. What is really disappointing is the lack of progress that's been made on Bill C-11, which I think for all it's, we could have a whole conversation on that, but that is ultimately the foundation to not just open banking, but to open data more broadly. And until we get clarity on what that will look like, and ultimately the path that we'll be able to start to build in this country going forward, we're only going to be left to a large degree with market-led solutions. And I don't begrudge, like, to be clear, I understand the interests, because I share some of this in moving this thing forward. We have to find ways to do it, but we've got to have the right foundation in place. Otherwise, we just head down the path of a market that looks and continues to look very similar to the one that we have today.
Perfect. Rami, Cash, just a question's come through in regards to, we've seen quite a narrow product range in some countries for open banking. And the question is, would we allow services to be built to access, say, credit card information, RRSPs, TFSAs, insurance information, etc.? Do you see benefit in having that broader product suite if we introduce open banking within Canada?
Do you want me to take? I can take that.
Sure.
Yeah. I think in general, right now, the way it works is like, without there being a framework in place, I think the slew of services that are available are being made available regardless through screen scraping. And in terms of the scope, and the Department of Finance has been pretty clear on it, it's like they'll start with like read access to be able to facilitate the needs of in terms of sharing of information, but that'll be driven based on like priority, right? It's like what information is available today and how do I access it is like a table stake. And so whatever those use cases are today that are in market, from an Interac perspective, we typically tend to stay use case agnostic. We're more about like how do we facilitate the parties actually coming together to be able to meet the needs of those consumers. And so I think that's just a given. It doesn't like, it's hard to define which use cases. And Rami, I mean, or even you, Ben, for the fintech representative, you guys may have better visibility into the kinds of use cases beyond what's actually being considered today through the not so great screen scraping.
I would just like this use case approach too. Maybe just one last comment for me. Let the consumer define the use case. Like, yeah. I think this is the scope of the data is what needs to be determined, and then let the banks, the fintechs, whoever define the use case. The idea of the market defining use cases within which you've got to fit the customer is approaching it from the inside out. We need to, a good example of traditional mindset to a new problem set. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It's also just to build on Ben, what you were just saying. One of the key things that is like a point of contention is like, if we start with the use cases that says, I'm going to do use case X, and these are the data elements that will need to be shared in order for me to facilitate that use case, then it is the opposite of innovation, because you're saying, these are the only use cases that need to be actually facilitated, and this is the only information that needs to be shared for that to happen. What about when you actually broaden the scope of data that is shared, and for you to actually come up with new innovative products that I actually didn't start off with in the first place? So it's like starting from that premise is also an odd one, and that's for those organizations that have actually brought innovative use cases to market. It's not because they said, let me start with the use case. It's actually like, let's actually see what, based on the information between these entities and between consumers, let's actually figure out what we can do to it to facilitate the needs that they may, as a consumer, not even realize they actually needed or wanted.
And that criticality, I mean, that's the key thing. Yeah. Guys, we're at time. 50 minutes has flown by. I mean, I certainly jotted down the customer centricity, and certainly the use case, the centricity of the customer use cases there, the safe sharing of data, safety being a key theme, and engagement really being the primary theme from this panel. Let's get it. And then 2 key points: get going, and the pace of innovation needs to certainly improve within Canada. So they were certainly the key themes that I picked up from this illustrious panel. Thank you all for your time. I think certainly from the commentary down the side, we certainly got some very strong points across. So very much appreciate all your time and efforts today. And thank you to all the participants for attending. And so that concludes the panel today. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.